Hi everyone, it's Sandra, and this is Cinderella, my indoor worm bin. I thought I set this bin up for our potential 4-week vacation, but when we came home early, I found that she was drying out. I only looked long enough to see one living worm before I dumped a tub of 500 milliliters or about 17 ounces of water and left it alone until today. We'll check those results, but first let me show you what I did before we went away. In order to prepare Cinderella and her worms for our extended absence, I decided to create a much larger feeding zone than I normally do. Here I'm just tearing up some tissues to serve as the basis for the feeding. Cinderella gets everything we sweep off the floor, and unfortunately that also includes our tissues and paper towels. She'd been recently harvested, so I wanted to make sure I had a lot of bedding in here that would be easily eaten or consumed by the microbes and then the worms. Next, I add a good layer of my previously frozen food scraps. These are various root vegetable peels, parsnips and carrots and the like. And then I have some of those baby carrots that were recalled actually, and topped with some even more previously frozen food scraps with eggshell powder mixed in. Now, root vegetables last longer in a worm bin, and that's what I was going for here. The density of their root structure make them less permeable to the microbes. I top it up with some mildly moist bedding. That's a mixture of newspaper and some shredded leaves, and top it up with some shredded packing paper. Now, root vegetables release their moisture more slowly, so that's a mistake I made. This bin was recently harvested, and even though there's some good buildup of castings because I never deplete the bin, I was banking on those food scraps to wet all that carbon down. But I thought the bigger feeding zone would not create a moisture problem, which was first and foremost in my mind. After pulling over the moist existing bedding, I come back to today. So this is my first look after dumping that big tub of rainwater into Cinderella. Remember, I did see one living worm before I did that, but I didn't want to disturb it and mix up dry bedding into worms that would be otherwise alive. I'm going into this end, which is actually the old feeding zone because the bin is rotated, and look at what I found. Not only did I find Cinderella's worms, but they look plump and happy. Remember, I've left them alone for 7 days with that tub of water just for the water to equalize throughout the bin. So I don't actually know where the worms were hiding when I went into it a week ago and found the dry bedding. You can see those discolored tissues that were on the bottom of the feeding zone. If they weren't moist after the feeding, they are certainly moist now. I would far rather have a wet bin that's a little bit muddy to deal with, as long as it's not anaerobic, of course, than that dried out bin that I found when I came back from vacation. Even though it's now been 3 weeks, those mushy baby carrots are still intact, showing the resilience of root vegetables to resist microorganism attack. Actually, I think when I went back to the beginning of the tape, there were like 8 or 9 of those baby carrots, and I certainly didn't find that many. I just found a few. Those carrots aren't enough for the population size that I'm seeing, so I'm next going to give these worms a good feeding because they're hungry. In true Cinderella fashion, she gets some dryer lint and all of our road trip napkins and tissues, even the little wheelchair decal that we display when we go on BC ferries that got a little bit sun-faded. As I said, I think these worms are hungry, and I saw so many of them, so I'm going to actually give them a good feeding of my previously frozen food scraps. That will contain a lot of moisture, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. I just want to get these worms fed. It's kind of a catch-22. The more food scraps I put in, the more moisture I'm introducing. So I'm really swinging hard on the carbon side to make sure I balance it all out. I have a few more dry bits of paper from our van, a tea bag wrapper, and I demote the grocery bag that's been sitting on top of Cinderella to go over that feeding zone to start wicking up some of that moisture. Because the dump of water went everywhere in the bin now, I'm also going to bury some carbon on the opposite end to the feeding zone just to, again, just start gently drying out this vermicompost from my rescue operation. As you know, Cinderella gets all my dried out flower bouquets from the kitchen table and a bunch of other atypical bedding. So I actually think this extra moisture in the bin is going to do a great job at helping to break down that material. I'm running into some great little pockets of worms here and there, but I haven't found Prince Charming for 2 feedings now. He's my clay worm feeding zone indicator. He's buried in here somewhere. Please let me know if you see where he is with all this tumbling of the material. I'm clearly relieved that Cinderella's worms seem to be doing just fine, so I'm just going to give the other end of that kitchen grocery bag into this end and put these moist vermicompost right back on top. The guideline is always about a 2-to-1 ratio of how much carbon you put in your bin versus higher nitrogen foods like food scraps. But I think I've gone probably closer to 3 or 4-to-1 with the carbon today. I'm okay with that. I'm not looking for speed here. I'm looking for the health of my worms. And if this little cluster of guys is anything to go by, my worms in Cinderella are doing just fine. The higher moisture content will not only keep the microbes happy and help break down the chunkier material more quickly, but it will also lead to higher reproduction rates and more cocoons, just like this one. Thank you so much for your support when I thought my bins had dried out, everyone. Thanks for watching and commenting. Bye for now.